The forbidden attraction. The large, silver Zenorian ship hovered silently above Earth's capital, its smooth surface reflecting the sunlight. It was an awe-inspiring sight for the humans below, who gathered in crowds to catch a glimpse of their alien visitors. Inside the ship, Kyra adjusted her diplomatic robes, her glowing blue eyes scanning the Earth's skyline through the observation window. She wasn't here for sightseeing. Her mission was clear: protect her people's interests and maintain peace. Kyra belonged to the Zenorian race, an advanced species that prided themselves on logic and order. Emotions were seen as weaknesses, and any form of romantic connection with humans was strictly forbidden. Her people had created laws centuries ago to prevent such entanglements, considering humans unpredictable and primitive. Kyra had always believed in these laws, until today. As the ship landed gracefully on the government landing pad, Kyra and her delegation descended the ramp. Earth's leaders stood waiting to greet them, but Kyra's attention was drawn to someone standing slightly apart from the group: Ethan. He wasn't like the others in their stiff suits and calculated smiles. Ethan wore a simple lab coat, his dark hair messy as though he had been too busy working to care about appearances. His sharp brown eyes locked on Kyra, studying her with curiosity. Kyra tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the formalities of the summit. Yet, she felt a strange pull toward him, a sensation she couldn't explain. During the meeting, Earth's leaders discussed resource sharing and technology exchange. Kyra sat at the long table, her hands folded neatly, her expression calm. But every time she glanced toward Ethan, who was there as a scientific advisor, her composure wavered. His presence felt different, unlike anyone she had encountered before. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he presented a proposal for joint research between humans and Zenorians. His voice was steady, confident, and full of passion. Kyra couldn't help but notice how he talked about collaboration, about building bridges between their worlds. While others spoke with caution or fear, Ethan spoke with hope. "Imagine what we could achieve together," Ethan said, his voice filled with conviction. "Humans and Zenorians, working side by side, learning from each other. We're stronger united than apart." Kyra felt a pang in her chest, something unfamiliar. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. Her training as a diplomat had prepared her for countless situations, but not for this, a strange, unexplainable attraction to a human. After the meeting, Kyra retreated to a quiet corner of the Earth's embassy. She needed a moment to compose herself. But before she could collect her thoughts, Ethan approached her, holding a tablet with data from his presentation. "Ambassador Kyra," he said, his voice polite but warm, "I wanted to thank you for considering my proposal." Kyra turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "It is our duty to consider all possibilities," she replied, her tone formal. Ethan smiled, a gesture that felt disarming. "You're very composed. I can't imagine it's easy being surrounded by people who look at you like you're from another galaxy." Kyra raised an eyebrow. "I am from another galaxy." Ethan chuckled softly. "Fair point. But you're still just as curious about us as we are about you. I can see it in your eyes." Her heart skipped a beat. Did he know? Could he see the turmoil inside her? She quickly masked her emotions, stepping back slightly. "Curiosity does not mean attachment, Mr. Ethan." But before she could walk away, their hands brushed as he handed her the tablet. The moment their skin touched, Kyra felt a jolt, a spark that shot through her entire body. She froze, her glowing blue eyes wide in shock. Ethan felt it too, pulling his hand back in surprise. "What was that?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with wonder. Kyra didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind raced, trying to understand what had just happened. It wasn't normal. It wasn't supposed to happen. "I must go," she said abruptly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. She turned and walked away quickly, leaving Ethan standing there, confused but intrigued. As Kyra returned to her quarters aboard the Zenorian ship, she couldn't shake the feeling. Her heart raced, her mind clouded with thoughts of Ethan. She remembered the stories from her youth, the tales of Xenorians who had broken the rules, who had fallen for humans, and paid the ultimate price. But this was different, wasn't it? It had to be. There was no logical explanation for the spark she had felt, no reason why a human should affect her this way. Yet, deep down, she couldn't deny it. She was drawn to him. Back on Earth, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Kyra. There was something about her, something beyond her alien beauty and calm demeanor. He had seen the way she looked at him, even if she tried to hide it. He didn't know what it meant, but he was determined to find out. For Kyra, the internal battle had just begun. Her people's laws were clear, and disobedience came with severe consequences. But for the first time in her life, Kyra felt something she couldn't control, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. The law and the heart. Inside her quarters aboard the Xenorian ship, Kyra sat in silence, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at her reflection. Her glowing blue eyes, a mark of her species' disciplined logic, now seemed dim, clouded by something new. She replayed the moment in her mind. Ethan's touch, the strange spark, and the way her heart had raced like a starship engine. She clenched her fists. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Xenorian Council had been very clear when she was sent to Earth. Humans are not our equals, they had warned. They are emotional, chaotic, and dangerous. You are there to maintain order, not to form connections. She had accepted this without question. But now, something inside her whispered that maybe the Council didn't understand everything. A sudden chime interrupted her thoughts. The hologram of Orak, her Xenorian monitor, appeared in the center of her room. Orak was a stoic elder with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce through lies. "Ambassador Kyra," he said, his tone cold. "The Council requires a status update on the Earth negotiations. Have you observed any troubling human behaviors?" Kyra hesitated. The image of Ethan's curious, warm smile flashed in her mind, but she quickly pushed it away. "The humans are cooperative," she said carefully. "There have been no major incidents." Orak studied her, his gaze narrowing slightly. "Good. Remember, Ambassador, you are a representative of our race. Any deviation from protocol will reflect poorly on the Xenorian people, and on you." The hologram vanished before Kyra could respond. She exhaled shakily, her resolve tightening. Whatever was happening with Ethan, she had to control it. Later that day, the Earth delegation invited the Xenorians to a cultural event, a gesture of goodwill to strengthen diplomatic ties. The venue was a grand Earth museum, filled with artifacts from humanity's past. Kyra moved through the crowd, her movements graceful yet distant. She wasn't expecting Ethan to approach her, but she wasn't surprised either. "You seem uncomfortable," Ethan said, falling into step beside her. Kyra glanced at him briefly. "Xenorians are not accustomed to gatherings like these." Ethan chuckled. "You mean loud humans, flashing lights, and too much small talk." Despite herself, Kyra felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Was this humor? She had read about it in Earth literature, but never understood its appeal. Yet here, in his presence, it felt comforting. "Why are you here, Ethan?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "To talk to you," he replied simply. "I have this feeling that you're not just here to follow orders. You're curious about us, aren't you?" Kyra stiffened. He was perceptive, dangerously so. "Curiosity does not mean I am willing to break my people's laws," she said firmly. "Laws," Ethan echoed, his tone thoughtful. "Funny thing about laws. Sometimes they're written to protect, but sometimes they're written to control. Have you ever questioned yours?" The question hung in the air like a charged particle. Kyra's logical mind screamed at her to end the conversation, but her heart, traitorous and untrained, urged her to keep talking. "I do not question what has worked for centuries," she said at last. Ethan nodded, though his expression suggested he didn't entirely agree. "Fair enough. But what if there's something your laws don't account for? Something unexpected?" Before Kyra could respond, A group of Xenorian officers entered the museum, their imposing presence drawing attention. Among them was Varric, a high-ranking officer known for his strict adherence to the Council's rules. He spotted Kyra and approached her immediately. "Ambassador Kyra," Varric said, his tone clipped, "you've been away from the delegation for too long. The Council expects you to remain focused." "I was observing the humans," Kyra replied smoothly, gesturing toward the exhibits around them. "Learning about their history is part of our mission." Varric's gaze flicked to Ethan, who stood quietly by her side. His jaw tightened. "Be cautious, Ambassador. Humans are unpredictable." With that, Varric turned and walked away, but not before casting one last suspicious glance at Ethan. Ethan waited until Varric was out of earshot before speaking. "Friend of yours?" "Hardly," Kyra replied. "He is one of the Council's most loyal enforcers." "And he doesn't trust me," Ethan said, his voice tinged with amusement. Kyra hesitated, then said, "It's not you he distrusts. It's me." Ethan frowned. "Why would they distrust you?" Kyra looked away, her expression unreadable. "Because I am different." Later that night, Kyra returned to her quarters, her thoughts in turmoil. She stared at the small tracker on her wrist, a device the Council had placed to monitor her movements. It felt heavy now, a symbol of the restrictions binding her. In her mind, she heard Ethan's voice again. "Have you ever questioned your laws?" For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to wonder. Why were her people so afraid of humans? Was it truly about superiority, or was there something deeper, something hidden? Before she could dwell on the thought, her wrist device blinked red, a sign she was being summoned. The Council wanted a private briefing. As she prepared to face their scrutiny once more, Kyra felt a growing unease. Her feelings for Ethan weren't just dangerous. They were forbidden, and the cost of breaking Xenorian law could be her life. Secrets in the shadows. The Xenorian ship's corridors were cold and metallic, echoing with the soft hum of its energy core. Kyra moved through them silently, her footsteps almost soundless. She was on edge. The Council's summons earlier had been brief but clear: maintain distance from humans, fulfill the mission, and return to Xanor immediately after the negotiations. But what they didn't say spoke louder than their words. She knew she was being watched. Back in her quarters, she examined her tracker, its small, pulsing red light reminding her of her invisible leash. Her every movement, every interaction was likely being logged. If the Council suspected even the slightest deviation, they would act swiftly. Yet, despite the threat, her mind wandered back to Ethan. His words lingered like an unanswered question. What if there's something your laws don't account for? The next evening, Ethan found her again, this time in a secluded garden near the Earth Embassy. He approached cautiously, sensing her unease. "You shouldn't be here," Kyra said, her voice sharp, though she didn't turn to face him. "I couldn't help myself," Ethan replied, his tone light. "You're fascinating, you know that." She turned to him, her glowing blue eyes narrowing. "To you, perhaps. To my people, I'm merely an observer." Ethan leaned against a nearby tree, studying her. "No, you're more than that. I can see it. You're curious about us, about me. Don't deny it." Kyra's composure faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained control. "Your arrogance is astounding, human." "Ethan," he corrected with a grin. "And maybe it's arrogance, or maybe it's just the truth. Either way, you're still talking to me, which says something, doesn't it?" Kyra turned away, trying to suppress the warmth creeping into her cheeks. "You misunderstand. I am here to observe your culture, nothing more." "Then why do you look at me like I'm a puzzle you're trying to solve?" Ethan pressed. Kyra froze. She didn't have an answer, or at least not one she was willing to admit. Instead, she said, "You humans think emotions are the answer to everything. But emotions are dangerous. They cloud judgment, weaken resolve. My people know better." Ethan stepped closer, his voice softer now. Or maybe your people are afraid of what emotions could do, afraid of the power they hold. Kyra's heart raced. His words felt like a challenge, one she wasn't sure she could win. Before she could respond, a sharp beeping sound from her wrist interrupted them. "What's that?" Ethan asked, concerned. Kyra glanced at the tracker, her face hardening. "A reminder of where I belong." She turned to leave, but Ethan reached out and gently caught her arm. "Kyra," he said, his voice earnest, "I don't know what your people have told you about us, but we're not all bad. And you're not as different from us as you think." For a brief moment, Kyra allowed herself to look at him, really look at him. His eyes held no judgment, no fear, only understanding. It was dangerous, how easily he made her feel seen. "I cannot stay," she whispered, pulling away from his grasp. "This, whatever it is, it cannot happen." Ethan watched her go, a mix of frustration and determination in his expression. "We'll see about that," he muttered to himself. Back aboard her ship, Kyra's thoughts were in chaos. She activated her data terminal and began researching Earth's history, looking for anything to explain the strange connection she felt with Ethan. She found references to ancient myths, stories of alien visitors who lived among humans thousands of years ago. But one document caught her attention, a heavily redacted file in the Xenorian archives. It spoke of a biological convergence between early humans and Xenorians, a phenomenon that had been deemed dangerous and subsequently suppressed. The file ended abruptly, with no explanation of what the convergence meant or why it was dangerous. Kyra's heart pounded. Was this connected to what she felt with Ethan? Could their strange spark be more than just an anomaly? Her terminal suddenly blinked with an incoming message. It was from Varric, the Xenorian officer who had warned her at the museum. His face appeared on the screen, his expression stern. "You've been accessing restricted files," Varric said, his tone accusing. "What are you looking for, Kyra?" She quickly deactivated the terminal, but the damage was done. Varric would report her, and the council would undoubtedly demand answers. The next day, Ethan received an encrypted message on his personal device. It was from Kyra. "Meet me tonight," the message read. "Same place. Do not tell anyone." Ethan's heart raced as he read the message. He didn't know what Kyra was planning, but he knew one thing: this was far from over. That night, Kyra waited in the shadows of the garden, her hood pulled low to hide her face. When Ethan arrived, she wasted no time. "I found something," she said in a hushed voice, "a secret my people have been hiding for centuries. It's about humans and Xenorians. About us." Ethan's brow furrowed. What kind of secret? Kyra hesitated, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "My people believe humans are beneath us. But the truth is, we're more connected than they've ever admitted. And I think the council knows." Ethan leaned closer, his curiosity piqued. "What are you saying, Kyra?" Before she could answer, a loud hum filled the air. Kyra's tracker began flashing red, and a hologram of Varric appeared nearby. "Ambassador Kyra," Varric said, his voice cold and commanding. "Step away from the human. You are under investigation for unauthorized activity." Ethan stepped in front of Kyra instinctively, his jaw set. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Varric's eyes narrowed. "That is not for you to decide, human." Kyra clenched her fists, her glowing eyes brightening with defiance. She had a choice to make: surrender and face the council's judgment, or fight for the truth. For the first time in her life, Kyra chose to fight. The cost of love. The garden erupted into chaos. Varric's hologram dissolved. But the threat was clear. Moments later, Xenorian security drones descended from the skies, their sleek metallic forms gleaming under the moonlight. Kyra grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him into the shadows. "We need to move," she said urgently, her glowing eyes scanning their surroundings for an escape route. Ethan followed without question, his heart pounding. "What's going on? Why are they after you?" Kyra didn't look back as she led him through a narrow path behind the embassy. "Because I've discovered something the council doesn't want me, or anyone, to know. And now they'll do whatever it takes to silence me. Ethan frowned. What did you find? Kyra stopped abruptly, pressing herself against the cold stone wall as a drone passed overhead. She turned to Ethan, her voice low but intense. Humans and Xenorians share more than history. We share biology. My people covered it up, but there's a reason why some Xenorians, like me, feel drawn to certain humans. It's a connection the Council has suppressed for generations. Ethan's mind raced. So this spark between us, it's not just random. Kyra shook her head. No, it's something deeper, something they fear. If the truth gets out, it could dismantle everything my people believe about our superiority. And now, because of you, because of us, they'll see me as a threat. Before Ethan could respond, a low hum vibrated the ground beneath them. Kyra's tracker blinked furiously, and a voice echoed from the device. Kyra, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Do not resist. Kyra ripped the tracker from her wrist and crushed it beneath her boot. She grabbed Ethan's hand. Run. The two raced through the darkened city, weaving through alleyways and abandoned streets. The drones weren't far behind, their scanners sweeping the area. Ethan struggled to keep up, his breathing labored. Where are we even going? He gasped. There's a safe house, Kyra replied, her voice strained. An old Xenorian outpost from the early days of the peace talks. It's off the grid. They finally reached an old, overgrown structure hidden on the outskirts of the city. Kyra entered a code into a concealed panel, and a door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the safe house was sparse but functional. Kyra activated the main console, and a soft glow illuminated the room. She checked the surveillance feeds and sighed in relief. We're clear for now, she said, sinking into a chair. Ethan paced the room, his mind still reeling. So, your people lied about humans, about this connection. But why? What are they so afraid of? Kyra hesitated, her expression conflicted. Xenorians have always prided ourselves on being superior. Logical, disciplined, evolved beyond the chaos of emotion. Admitting that we're biologically linked to humans, that we might need you, would shatter everything we've built. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her. But isn't it better to know the truth? To embrace it? Kyra met his gaze, her glowing eyes softening. You don't understand, Ethan. The truth could destroy my entire society. It could lead to war, chaos. And for what? A connection that's forbidden. Ethan stepped closer. It's not just a connection. It's real, Kyra. You feel it, don't you? That spark, that pull, it's more than biology. It's something worth fighting for. Kyra looked away, her heart aching. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her people's laws pressed down on her. Meanwhile, aboard the Xenorian ship, Varric stood before a council hologram. Kyra has gone rogue, he reported, his voice clipped. She has removed her tracker and is harboring a human. I recommend immediate extraction. The council members exchanged cold glances. Capture her alive if possible, one of them said. But if she resists, you know what must be done. Varric's jaw tightened. Understood. Back at the safe house, Ethan watched as Kyra worked at the console, pulling up old Xenorian files. He noticed the fatigue in her movements, the way her shoulders sagged. Kyra, he said gently, you don't have to do this alone. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. I don't have a choice. If I don't find proof of what I've discovered, the council will brand me a traitor. They'll erase me, Ethan. And everything I've learned will die with me. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, and she flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away. You're not alone, he said firmly. Whatever happens, I'm with you. Kyra turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this together. But the moment was short-lived. The console beeped with an alert, and Kyra's expression darkened. "They found us," she whispered. The safe house shook as the sound of approaching drones filled the air. Ethan grabbed a small weapon from a nearby shelf. "What's the plan?" Kyra straightened, her resolve hardening. "We fight, and if we can't win, we run." As the drones closed in, Kyra and Ethan stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. For Kyra, the cost of love was no longer just her freedom. It was her very life. But as she glanced at Ethan, she knew one thing for certain. He was worth it. Escape and betrayal. The safe house trembled as the Xenorian drones unleashed blinding searchlights, their metallic voices echoing commands to surrender. Inside, Kyra and Ethan prepared for a confrontation they knew they couldn't win. Kyra's hands hovered over the console, her glowing eyes scanning the interface. "I need time to disable the tracking signal. Without it, they'll lose our location." Ethan gripped the alien weapon tightly, its unfamiliar weight making his hands tremble. "And what if they break through before you finish?" Kyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Then we won't have to worry about running anymore." Ethan swallowed hard but nodded. He positioned himself near the door, the weapon aimed at the entry point. The hum of the drones grew louder, followed by the clanging of their metallic limbs against the exterior walls. The first drone breached the door, its sleek body glowing with Xenorian energy. Ethan fired instinctively, the alien weapon emitting a pulse that sent the drone crashing to the ground. "Nice shot," Kyra said without looking up. Ethan managed a grim smile. "I'd rather be lucky than good." More drones followed, forcing Ethan into a frantic battle. Kyra worked furiously, her fingers a blur over the console. "They're adapting to the weapon's frequency," she warned. "You won't be able to hold them off much longer." "Then hurry," Ethan shouted, firing another shot as a drone lunged toward him. Just as Kyra disabled the signal, a deafening crash shook the safe house. The wall behind them exploded inward, revealing Varric and a squad of heavily armed Xenorian enforcers. "Kyra," Varric said coldly, his weapon aimed directly at her. "Step away from the human and surrender." Kyra stood slowly, her glowing eyes meeting his. "I won't let you erase the truth, Varric. Not this time." Varric's expression hardened. "The Council's laws are clear. You've betrayed your people. Surrender now, and I'll ensure your punishment is lenient." Ethan stepped between them, his weapon raised. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." Varric smirked. Brave for a human. Foolish, but brave. Before Kyra could intervene, Ethan lunged at Varric, but the Xenorian officer moved with lightning speed, disarming Ethan in an instant. Varric pinned him to the ground, his weapon aimed at his chest. "Enough of this," Varric said, his tone icy. "Kyra, you have one chance. Come with me, or he dies." Kyra's heart raced. She stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly with the strange energy she had begun to manifest since meeting Ethan. "You don't want to do this, Varric," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. Varric hesitated, his gaze flicking to her glowing hands. "What is that? What are you?" Kyra took another step forward. "Something your council didn't tell you. Something they're afraid of." With a sudden burst of energy, Kyra unleashed a shockwave that sent Varric and his enforcers flying backward. The drones malfunctioned, collapsing into lifeless heaps. Ethan scrambled to his feet, staring at her in awe. "How did you?" he began, but Kyra grabbed his arm. "No time," she said. "We need to go." The pair escaped into the wilderness, leaving the destroyed safe house behind. The night was cold and silent, the only sounds their hurried footsteps and labored breathing. As they rested by a small stream, Ethan finally broke the silence. "That power, it's not just biology, is it? It's something more." Kyra nodded slowly. "It's ancient. My people suppressed it when they decided to cut ties with humans. They feared it would make us unpredictable, emotional, weak. But now, I see it's the opposite. It makes us stronger." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and concern. "And the council? They'll never stop hunting you." Kyra's expression darkened. "No, but we have something they don't. The truth." Back aboard the Xenorian ship, Varric faced the council's holograms, his pride bruised but his resolve intact. "Kyra has unlocked the convergence," he reported. "Her connection to the human has activated abilities we believed dormant." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. "She must be stopped," one of them said. "If she spreads the truth, it will destabilize everything." Varric hesitated. Permission to eliminate her? The council leader's eyes narrowed. "No, capture her alive. We need to understand this power and ensure it cannot be replicated." As Kyra and Ethan journeyed deeper into the wilderness, they stumbled upon a ruined structure half buried in the earth. Its design was neither entirely human nor Xenorian, a relic of their shared past. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with wonder. Kyra knelt by the entrance, running her fingers over the ancient symbols etched into the stone. "Proof," she said softly, "that our connection isn't an anomaly. It's history." Ethan helped her push open the heavy door, revealing a hidden chamber filled with glowing crystals and holographic records. As they stepped inside, Kyra felt a strange sense of belonging. "This is where it began," she whispered, "where humans and Xenorians first converged, and where the council's lies started." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then it's also where we'll find our answers." Kyra nodded, determination hardening her gaze. The council wanted to bury this, but now it's the key to everything. Unbeknownst to them, a tracking device hidden in Ethan's discarded weapon had activated. Varric and his squad were already on their trail. The sanctuary was no longer a refuge. It was a trap waiting to spring. Sacrifices for freedom. The sanctuary hummed with ancient energy, its glowing crystals casting shifting patterns of light across the walls. Kyra moved through the chamber cautiously, her hands brushing over the holographic symbols floating in midair. These weren't just records, they were memories, fragments of a history her people had buried. Ethan stood nearby, studying the room with equal parts fascination and unease. "This place, it feels alive," he said, his voice hushed. Kyra nodded. "It is. These crystals store more than data. They hold the essence of the convergence, the shared history of humans and Xenorians." She paused, her glowing eyes narrowing as one crystal pulsed brightly under her touch. "This one. It's the key." A hologram flickered to life, showing Xenorian ancestors walking side by side with early humans. They exchanged knowledge, shared resources, even worked together to create a harmonious society. But as the hologram progressed, the tone shifted. The Xenorian Council of the past declared humans a threat, erasing all evidence of their shared bond and banishing their own people who had chosen to remain with humans. Ethan watched in silence, his jaw tightening. They didn't just lie. They erased everything, entire lives, families, relationships, all because they were afraid. Kyra's hands clenched into fists, afraid of what humans could bring out in us. Emotions, chaos, power. They wanted control, and this was their solution. She turned to Ethan, her voice trembling with conviction. "We can't let them continue. People deserve to know the truth." Before they could delve further, the sanctuary's entrance exploded with a deafening roar. Varric and his enforcers stormed in, weapons drawn, their expressions grim. "Kyra," Varric said, stepping forward. "It's over. Surrender, and I'll make sure the council spares your life." Kyra stepped protectively in front of Ethan, her glowing hands sparking faintly with energy. "Spare me. For what? Exposing the truth? No, Varric. This ends here." Varric's jaw tightened. "You've gone too far. You've abandoned everything we stand for." Kyra's voice was steady, but there was a fire in her eyes. "Maybe it's time we stood for something better." Varric raised his weapon. "Don't make me do this." Kyra didn't hesitate. She unleashed a blast of energy that sent Varric and his squad flying. The sanctuary trembled under the force, its crystals glowing brighter as if reacting to her power. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Kyra, you're destabilizing the structure." "I don't have a choice," she said through gritted teeth, her energy swirling around her like a storm. "If they take this place, the truth dies with it." Varric recovered quickly, his gaze locking onto Kyra. He signaled his squad to surround her, but Kyra raised her hands, summoning another wave of energy. This time, it was stronger, more focused. The Zenorian enforcers hesitated, their weapons faltering under the pressure of her power. "Enough," Varric shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He stepped forward, his own hands glowing faintly with a similar energy. Kyra froze, her eyes widening. You have it too." Varric's expression darkened. "We all do. The Council just taught us to suppress it. You've let it consume you, Kyra. It's dangerous." "No," she said, her voice firm. "It's freedom." The room erupted into chaos as Kyra and Varric clashed, their energies colliding in a brilliant display of light and sound. Ethan scrambled to find cover, his heart racing as the sanctuary began to collapse around them. Amid the destruction, Kyra began to weaken. The strain of wielding her power was taking its toll, her glowing eyes dimming as her movements slowed. Varric noticed her faltering and pressed his advantage, striking her with a concentrated burst of energy that sent her crashing to the ground. "Kyra," Ethan shouted, rushing to her side. Varric aimed his weapon at both of them. "It's over. The Council will ensure this place is destroyed, and you will face justice." But Ethan wasn't ready to give up. He stood in front of Kyra, his arms spread wide. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." Varric hesitated, his weapon wavering. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. "Varric," Kyra said weakly, her voice barely a whisper, "you don't have to follow their orders. You can choose to stand with us." The crystals around them pulsed, as if echoing her words. Varric looked at the glowing symbols, at the truth his people had buried. For the first time, he questioned everything he had been taught. "I can't," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. But instead of firing, he lowered his weapon. "Go, before I change my mind." Ethan helped Kyra to her feet, and together they made their way deeper into the sanctuary. Varric stayed behind, watching as the structure began to collapse. At the heart of the sanctuary, Kyra found a central console connected to the remaining crystals. With the last of her strength, she activated it, sending a pulse of energy into the sky. "What did you do?" Ethan asked, supporting her as she swayed on her feet. Kyra managed a faint smile. "I sent the truth. To Earth. To Zenor. To anyone who will listen." The sanctuary shook violently, and Ethan pulled her close as the ceiling began to cave in. Just as it seemed they would be buried alive, a hidden passage opened behind them, leading to safety. Outside, as the sanctuary crumbled into rubble, Kyra collapsed against Ethan, her glowing eyes fading. "You saved the truth," Ethan said softly, holding her close. "You saved us." Kyra looked up at him, her voice weak but determined. "It's not over. The Council will fight this, but now the truth is out there. And so are we." As they disappeared into the wilderness, the pulse of light from the sanctuary continued to spread across the skies, a beacon of change that would spark a revolution. A new dawn. The pulse of light from the sanctuary raced across Earth's atmosphere, reaching satellites, stations, and even the Zenorian mothership hovering in orbit. The hidden truths encoded within it began to unravel centuries of lies. Across both worlds, holographic projections displayed images of humans and Zenorians coexisting, building and thriving together. The revelation rippled like a shockwave, igniting confusion, anger, and hope in equal measure. For Kyra and Ethan, the battle was far from over. Deep in the Zenorian council chamber, the holographic projections of the sanctuary's truth flickered on every surface. The council members sat in stunned silence as their carefully constructed narrative crumbled before their eyes. "This cannot be allowed to spread," one counselor said, his voice trembling. Another counselor slammed her hand on the table. "It's too late. The people will question everything now. If we don't act quickly, we risk losing control." The council leader, his face grave, spoke with cold finality. "We will brand Kyra and the human as enemies of both species. They will be hunted, captured, and silenced. Prepare the fleet." Far from the council's reach, Kyra and Ethan hid in a dense forest, their breaths visible in the cool night air. Kyra leaned against a tree, her glowing eyes flickering faintly. She was still recovering from the sanctuary's collapse, her strength drained. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand gently brushing hers. "We need to move soon. The council won't sit idle after what you've done." Kyra nodded weakly. "I know, but we can't keep running forever. We need allies. Xenorians and humans who believe in the truth." Ethan's eyes narrowed with determination. "Then we give them a reason to believe. We rally those who've been doubting the council's lies. And we fight back." Their first stop was a human resistance group, scientists and activists who had always suspected that humanity's history was more intertwined with alien visitors than they had been told. Kyra's presence, along with the proof she carried from the sanctuary, galvanized them into action. "We've been waiting for something like this," one resistance leader said, staring at the holographic data Kyra had shared. "The council won't be able to hide this now, but we'll need to protect you both. You're the spark that can light the fire." On the Xenorian side, Kyra secretly reached out to dissenters within her own race, those who had grown weary of the council's rigid control. To her surprise, she found more allies than she had expected. One of them, a young Xenorian named Lyra, met Kyra in a remote outpost. "I've always questioned the council's teachings," Lyra admitted, "but what you've shown us, it's undeniable. If the people knew, they'd rise up." Kyra placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Then we must make sure they do." As their rebellion grew, so did the council's efforts to crush them. Xenorian fleets descended on Earth, declaring Kyra and Ethan traitors and demanding their surrender. Propaganda flooded both worlds, painting the two as dangerous radicals threatening peace. But the seeds of doubt had already been sown. Across Earth and Xanar, people began to question the council's motives. Protests broke out, demanding answers and transparency. The council's control began to fracture. In the midst of the chaos, Kyra and Ethan found themselves at the heart of the Resistance's hidden base. The two stood before a crowd of humans and Xenorians, united for the first time in centuries. Kyra addressed them, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "For too long, the council has ruled through fear and lies. They told us we were too different to coexist, that humans were beneath us, and that emotion was a weakness. But they were wrong. Together, we are stronger. Together, we can build a future based on truth and unity." The crowd erupted in cheers, their shared hope lighting a fire that no fleet could extinguish. The final confrontation came when the council deployed its largest warship to Earth, aiming to destroy the resistance base and reclaim control. Kyra, Ethan, and their allies devised a desperate plan to infiltrate the ship and broadcast the sanctuary's full records across both worlds. Using their combined skills, Kyra's knowledge of Xenorian systems and Ethan's ingenuity, they bypassed the ship's defenses and reached the central command. But waiting for them was Varric. "You've gone far enough," Varric said, his voice cold. "The council won't let you undo everything we've built." Kyra stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly. "What you've built is a house of lies, Varric, and it's already crumbling." Varric hesitated, his weapon wavering. "You're risking everything. For what? A dream." Ethan spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Not a dream. A better reality, for both our species." For a moment, it seemed like Varric might stand down, but the sound of approaching soldiers snapped him back to duty. "You leave me no choice," Varric said, raising his weapon. Before he could fire, Lyra and a group of Xenorian rebels burst into the room, disarming the soldiers and forcing Varric to retreat. "Go," Lyra shouted. "We'll hold them off." Kyra and Ethan rushed to the central console, where Kyra began uploading the sanctuary's records. The ship shook as the Council's forces tried to regain control, but it was too late. The broadcast went live, streaming the truth across both worlds. Images of humans and Xenorians working together, of the Council's lies, and of the potential for unity flooded every screen. Back on Earth, people gathered in the streets, watching as the truth unfolded. Protests turned to celebrations as the Council's grip weakened. On Xanor, the Council chambers were stormed by dissenters demanding reform. Kyra and Ethan barely escaped the warship as it collapsed under its own chaos. They landed safely in a resistance craft, their hands clasped tightly together. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice filled with relief. Kyra smiled faintly, her glowing eyes reflecting the light of the rising sun. "This is just the beginning. The hard part is building what comes next." In the weeks that followed, humans and Xenorians began working together to rebuild trust and create a new alliance. Kyra and Ethan became symbols of the revolution, their story inspiring millions. Standing on a hill overlooking the United Earth and Xenorian delegation, Kyra turned to Ethan. "For centuries, they told us this was impossible, that love between our species could never exist." Ethan took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "They were wrong, and we proved it, together." As the first official declaration of unity was signed, a new era began, one built on truth, love, and the unbreakable bond between two species who had once been divided.